Yo, 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 what's going on, guys? My name is Tyler. I'm part of the FF Mediators here on the Face Off Sports Network. We are back with my Week 9 tight end rankings. But before we jump into those real quick, I just want to say thank you so much for all the love on the video. Last week, my Week 8 tight end rankings was the best performing video for me so far personally. So I really appreciate you guys tuning into that video. Now, we did have about 87% of people who weren't subscribed watching that video. So maybe it's due to an increase in numbers, but also maybe it's just you haven't hit it yet. You weren't paying attention. So go down below, just hit the subscribe button, hit the like button. That really helps me out. Comment below if I miss anybody or you think somebody should be ranked a little bit differently. But we are back. We are off of our National Tight End Day this past week. So we will hop right into my rankings this week, and you will see the man on the thumb and also the man on this graphic here, Tucker Kraft. He had one heck of a week in National Tight End Week, finishing with 2 touchdowns, 7 catches for 143 yards. I've been telling people that want to argue with me all they want to. Tucker Kraft is that dude in Green Bay. And so he lives here in tier 1. Yes, I have Trey McBride here coming off of bye from last week, along with Brock Bowers, who he should be healthy this coming week. But you see here, he's not in tier 1. So we will see where he ends up. Trey McBride taking on Dallas this week. It is the 11th best defense against tight ends. Trey McBride coming off of the bye, he is the number 1 tight end in targets, and he has a fewer game than most of these guys already played. So he's a guy you start week in, week out, no matter who the quarterback is. It looks like when Jacoby Brissett is in there, they have a little bit more competency in the passing game. Maybe it will be him. Maybe it will be Kyler this week. We will see as we go on later. We've got Tyler Warren here. I'm a Colts fan through and through. Everybody who has tuned into these videos knows that. He was held in check last week against Tennessee. They won 38-14. And really and truthfully, he just wasn't needed, guys. If you have not watched the Colts play, I encourage you to just go watch them play one game if you have the chance. Jonathan Taylor looks amazing. He should be in the race for MVP by far. I think the last non-quarterback or last running back to win it was Adrian Peterson in like 2012 or something. So I think he should definitely be up there. They're firing on all cylinders. But going back to what I was saying, he had 4 catches for 53 yards, no touchdowns against Tennessee, but they won by like 24 points. Really just wasn't needed, but they do go up against Pittsburgh this week, who I believe is the 31st or 30th ranked defense against tight ends. You just watched Tucker Kraft absolutely annihilate those guys last week. And so I look forward to this matchup this coming week between the Steelers and the Colts. We'll go pop my graphic back up here talking about the man, the myth, the legend, and that is Tucker Kraft. He goes up against Carolina this coming week, which is 27th against tight ends. Now, last week, Carolina, they had Buffalo. They got boat raced. Dalton Kincaid wasn't a big factor in that game due to that, despite the good matchup. However, like I said, I think the offense in Green Bay primarily runs through Tucker Kraft and Josh Jacobs. And so he is the number 1 fantasy tight end on the year. You play him with confidence. He has an 80.9, almost 81% route participation. That goes to show you how involved he is. His yards after catch per reception that he gets is almost 11 yards. So if you play in PPR formats, he's getting you almost 2 points every time he catches the ball. And he's got a 2.4, almost 2.5 yards per route run at the tight end position. That is absurd. And then last but not least here in tier 1, we have George Kittle. He takes on the Giants this week. He had 4 catches for 43 yards and a touchdown as well. His route participation should come as no shock to you. He is up at nearly 96%, and that's just because he is so necessary in the San Francisco offense that really and truthfully, they have nobody else. So they're going to need him again this week. Obviously, the Giants missing Cam Scatterboo after the devastating ankle injury this coming week. We'll see how they can rebound. They're already limited in weapons with Malik Neighbors out. So we will see if Jackson Dart can work some magic and keep this game close. But with that being said, let's move on to tier 2 here. You will see I have Jake Ferguson here at the top of my tier. Now, last week was a big woof for Jake Ferguson. Goose. He only had one target throughout the entire game, but they got boat raced by Denver. So, game really wasn't that close, and it honestly, I think it just kind of got schemed out. Still tied for second in touchdowns with Tucker Kraft, who we just talked about. He's still being used. He's running 86% of the routes, like on route participation. He's in 86% of those. So you continue to play Jake Ferguson here. And I don't think you think too much about last week. Now, you'll see I have Brock Bowers here. Obviously, this comes with a large asterisk, right? So before last week, which they had the bye last week, I talked about that before. Um, he had the PCL injury, and so it was also like a bone bruise that we didn't really know when he would be back. He had week one where he went out. He had a good week. He was like five catches on 8 targets for 103 yards. So he had a good week one. That's when he got injured. After that, he kind of looked a little limited because of said injury. And then since he's been out, you've watched this Raiders offense just kind of sputter, right? So I really don't know kind of where to put him here, but he's so elite as long as he's healthy that I feel like he has to be in tier two. Obviously, if word comes out that he's not healthy, he would move down for me. But if he's healthy, I'm going to roll him back out there against Jacksonville this week. They're a middle of the pack defense against tight end, around 17th, somewhere in that range. So I think you continue to play Brock Bowers, especially if he's healthy coming off the bye. And then you saw the guy on the graphic here. That is Kyle Pitts. He has been sneakily good, guys. He gets ready to take on New England this week, who is 29th against tight ends. He had 9 catches last week for only 59 yards, which was kind of disappointing. However, you had Michael Penix, who was out. You also had Drake London, who was out. So it was very limited, but you saw that when Drake London was out, Kyle Pitts was the guy that they went to. He had some rapport there with Kirk Cousins. It just never really amounted to much as far as touchdowns. So one stat that kind of stood out to me, I was going back and looking, and Kyle Pitts only has 3 red zone targets, so he doesn't have that many touchdowns. And you're like, well, 3 red zone targets, that's not a great number. However, Drake London only has 5. So really and truthfully, if you look at how the targets break down and how this team is functioning, they're scoring from outside of the red zone. And if Kyle Pitts is able to be the receiver of one of those touchdowns, he's going to have a good week for you. New England last week against the Browns gave up 10 catches for 99 yards and 2 touchdowns with Njoku coming back and then having Fannin as well. So I think it's a good matchup against tight ends. We'll see if Drake London is back. We'll see if Michael Penix is back. But I think you play Kyle Pitts here. And then Sam Laporta here at number 8 for me. He's coming back off of bye as well. Now, he does go up against Minnesota, who's ranked 13th against tight ends. And that's why I kind of have him listed here. I believe in Sam Laporta through and through. However, the tough matchup there, they did allow a good game kind of to Gadsden last week, 5 for 77 and a touchdown, who we'll talk about here in a second. Laporta is being used at a pretty high clip, about 84% route participation. And the one consistent thing, well, I guess we could say inconsistent thing, is JMO and his inability to be a consistent threat in this Lions offense. He's very boom bust. I think the 2 weeks that he's done anything, he's finished in the top 15. All the rest of the weeks, he's down in the 40, anywhere from the 40s to 60s at wide receiver. So this offense runs through Amon-Ra, runs through the running game, and then Laporta will be there to pick up the scraps on a consistent basis, whereas JMO will have those spike weeks. But I think you play Laporta here in tier 2. I think you could obviously do much worse. Gadsden here, I have at 9. He is for real, guys. The breakout is here. Competing with the likes of, Will Disley and I believe Tyler Conklin now. It's obvious that he is the best tight end that they have. And Justin Herbert is continuing to get him involved, right? I already mentioned his stat line from last week, the 5 catches for 77 yards and a touchdown. Now he takes on Tennessee this week. And you heard me mention earlier that Tyler Warren didn't really have a big impact in that game. Now, granted, the Colts are like the number one offense in the league right now. And so while I don't necessarily anticipate the Chargers to be that, I still don't think Tennessee can keep up. And so what I think is going to end up happening is they'll probably get up. The Chargers will get out to a big lead early. Tennessee won't really be able to keep up anything, and then they'll kind of turn to the run game. Maybe he becomes a chain mover later in the game, but I think this week it's limited upside. But with the production you've seen so far, you've got to play him at this point, which is why he lands in my tier 2. And then going on to tier 3 here, we have Travis Kelce, Dalton Kincaid, and Zach Ertz. Now, the Kelsey and Kincaid matchup this coming week, they play against each other, obviously. Um, it's going to be interesting, right? So I have Kelsey ranked higher, although it's a tougher matchup. So Buffalo is second against tight ends, whereas Kansas City is fourth. So it's very close, but the edge goes to Buffalo defensively. Now, last week or this past week, Kelsey went six catches for 99 yards and a touchdown. He was the tight end 2. He's the tight end 6 on the year. It still looks like him and Rashee Rice are the driving force behind the offense. You've seen Xavier Worthy kind of disappear here recently. He's not nearly being used nearly as consistently as he was. And so I think the benefactor of Rice coming back is actually probably Travis Kelce. And so it hurts Worthy a little bit. And with Worthy being more boom bust, and then also we just learned that Pacheco is going to be out this coming week and probably several weeks going forward. So you'll have the rookie and Brashard Smith coming in to play. You'll have Kareem Hunt there, but they may lean a little more on the passing game to kind of get them through some games here. So I think Kelce will have another good week. Then, like I said, Dalton Kincaid here didn't have a good week last week. I already mentioned. He played against Carolina. He was not needed at all. If you watch that game, James Cook absolutely demolished the Panthers. And really and truthfully, that was about all Buffalo really needed. Kincaid is still being used on 91% of the routes, like as far as that's when he's running routes. When they're on the field, throwing the ball, he's there 91% of the time. So you continue to play Kincaid. I just have him in tier 3 here this week because of the tough matchup. And then one spot behind Kelce just due to how the offense is kind of laid out currently. And then I have Zach Ertz here. Now, yes, Zach Ertz was not super productive on Monday Night Football. He only had 4 catches for 16 yards, but I cautioned everybody last week, it becomes tough whenever you have a backup quarterback. You don't have your star out there in Jaden Daniels with the hammy injury. And so it gets tough. I already was like, I don't really want to play Zach Ertz. I benched him in several spots this past week for players like Juwan Johnson and stuff like that, who actually had a pretty decent game. And so it was all about the scenario, right? We'll see if the scenario gets better at quarterback this week, but they do take on Seattle, who is like 19th against tight ends. So you're still in one of those middling matchups against tight ends. You take that chance, which is why he's here in tier 3. He's tight end 9 on the season, so he's still producing. We'll just have to see kind of where his upside could fall based on quarterback play. And then he had, like I said, he had the tough matchup against Kansas City. We knew that. I just talked about it with Dalton Kincaid. Mariota and Daniels, that could probably change. Obviously, if Mariota's back in there, he's probably scooting down into tier 4 for me with a lot of the streamer guys. He's a lot more of a toss-up at that point. But speaking of tier 4, we might as well just go ahead and hop in there. So tier 4, here is the rest of my top 24. I'll read through them real quick, and then we'll just pick out a few to talk about. I have Colston Loveland from the Bears, Mark Andrews, Juwan Johnson, A.J. Barner, Evan Ingram, T.J. Hawkinson, Theo Johnson, Hunter Henry, Dalton Schultz, Pat Freiermuth, Noah Fant, and Chig Okonkwo. Obviously, I've said before, Juwan Johnson had a good game, but before we get to him, I want to talk about Colston Loveland. Now, obviously, last week we had Cole Kmet missing with the back injury, and so Colston Loveland, kind of stepped into what we thought would be a bigger workload. Now, he only had 5 targets. He had 3 catches for 38 yards, but reporters talked to Ben Johnson after the game, and he was super excited with how Loveland performed. And he even said they wanted to get him more involved. If anybody knows anything about the Cincinnati defense, you know that they are the worst defense probably in the National Football League, but they are especially the worst against tight ends. So I'm thrilled going into that matchup. Obviously, if Komet comes back, he's probably moving down just a tad, but I don't know that he's going to be there this week. So I have Colston Loveland here at the top of my tier four. Mark Andrews, really, he's just a touchdown play week in and week out. If you have Lamar back against Miami, you take that bet and you just hope he scores, right? But another name to bring up, Juwan Johnson. He's back, guys. Now, he started off the season very hot. He had some down games after that, I think after about week 3. And then you had Foster Moreau and Taysom Hill come back, and everybody was just out, right? And so they were like, I'm not playing him anymore. They're going to take his snap share down, and it's just going to be hard to play. Well, you would be kind of right, but also kind of wrong. So he goes up against the Rams this week, which is a pretty tough matchup. It's 7th against tight ends. However, this past week, he had 5 catches on 8 targets for 53 yards. So you see the targets have already bumped back up, right? And if you watch the Saints game, which if you missed it, probably better than watching it, but they did end up benching Spencer Rattler later in the game in favor of Tyler Shuck, the rookie out of Louisville. So we will see how that rapport kind of develops with the new rookie quarterback. Juwan Johnson, I mentioned the snap percentages earlier. He has a 76% snap percentage still with those other 2 tight ends coming back. I mentioned it last week. I think Taysom Hill is more of like a quarterback / running back threat, not really the tight end that he was at one point, just because of Juwan Johnson being there. And Foster Moreau isn't doing anything either. Whenever they are running routes, Juwan Johnson is out there running routes 88% of the time. He has a pretty good late season schedule coming up. Let me see if I can get it pulled up here real quick for us. I meant to have it wrote down, but that is okay. He has 2 matchups that I know the rest of the season that are pretty difficult. This week being one of those with the Rams. But if we go and we look at his next few games, so he has the Rams. He then turns around. He plays Carolina. Okay, we've talked about Carolina ad nauseum at this point. Then he has a bye. So these next 3 weeks, you may get something out of Carolina next week because it's a divisional game. Those games are typically closer. Then you'll have the bye week, right? When you come back from the bye, you have Atlanta. So those next 4 weeks are kind of like, I don't know how I feel. But when you get to week 13 and on, so week 13 plays Miami, week 14, Tampa Bay, 15, Carolina, 16, the Jets. So like you're already getting into your playoff schedule, and Juwan Johnson is got a pretty nice schedule lined up here as far as the strength of schedule against tight ends, right? So I think he's a good matchup. You could kind of pick him up and stash him if you don't necessarily need him. Maybe something happens later in the season. I hope not for you, but you never know. Next, the guy I want to talk about is AJ Barner. Now, he's also coming back from bye this coming week. I'm not saying this in terms of he is some top tier tight end that has to be started, right? However, you just watched Travis Kelce go off against Washington, and Seattle plays Washington this coming week. AJ Barner is very boom bust. He has that great matchup, like I said, and he's tied for 4th in touchdowns. Now, Barner is not somebody that you're going to go out there and you're expecting him to have, 8 or 9 targets. He's going to catch 7 of them for, 50 some yards and a touchdown. He's more likely your 2 to 3 target or 2 to 3 catch guy, and then he's going to possibly score you a touchdown every week, right? So as of right now, he's averaging in half PPR about 7.8 points per game. His highest target game he's had so far is 7 this year with 7 catches. That was his 2 touchdown game. But typically he hovers around 3 targets or so. So really and truthfully, this is like I said, a boom bust, touchdown dependent guy who you have a shot every week that he plays, but it's just, a crapshoot. So down here in this tier, I would take a shot on him. You've got a few other names in here in Evan Ingram. TJ Hawkinson, I'm not really a big fan of. Hunter Henry's moved down this far for me this week. Um, he's taken on Atlanta. Bad matchup. That's why he's down so far. Dalton Schultz didn't really do anything last week like we expected him to. But I do want to bring up Pat Fryermuth here. Now, a lot of people were asking me last week why I had Pat Fryermuth over Jonnu Smith. I've been a bigger believer in Pat Fryermuth for a while now in terms of like his potential. Now, obviously, when they made the Jonnu trade, that hurt his stock, and he's been, dealing with target competition there in Pittsburgh ever since that happened, right? But I want to reiterate just a few things here. So, no, last week was not the best statistical week. Okay. 3 catches for 13 yards. You're like, why is this even coming up? It's not a good look. Okay. Number one, we already talked about the matchup. The Colts are playing Pittsburgh, vice versa, right? Well, guess what? Pittsburgh is 31st against tight ends, and the Colts are 30th. So they're literally back to back in terms of being bad against tight ends. And you've kind of seen Pat Fryermuth's usage trend up here later in the last few weeks. Um, they just allowed last week, the Colts did 6 catches for 76 yards and a touchdown to Tennessee, who, like I said, it wasn't even a close game, and they still gave up that stat line. Now, yes, like I said, target competition is a real deal. However, I've got my notes here, so I'm going to take a look. Um, he does lead all Pittsburgh tight ends in route percentage at 87.4%. Jonnu is somewhat close, but that's kind of where he sits. And then his yards per route run is up at like 1.7. Now, if you look at Jonnu Smith and Darnell Washington, there's hovers around 1. So he's obviously being used, but also he has a higher yards per route run. Like his influence on the offense, moving the ball down the field, right? That is higher for Pat Fryermuth when he is targeted. And I believe Aaron Rodgers is seeing that. So I think it will continue. He has a good matchup this week. So I am rolling Pat Fryermuth out there if I'm really hurting at tight end. And really and truthfully, you could do a whole lot worse, right? When it comes to tight end, you're hoping for touchdowns, obviously. But if you get any consistency, you're just as happy with that. Now, I did forget to mention at the start of the show, I'll put it in the description for those of you who have stayed tuned. Maybe you get a little bit of extra bonus here. Your buys this week are Cleveland, the Jets, the Eagles, and the Bucks. So you're missing some tight ends in terms of Fannin and Njoku. You've got Dallas Goedert, Kate Otten, and then Mason Taylor if that tickles your fancy at all. But that's my week 9 rankings here, guys. Feel free to let me know. Did I miss anybody? Do you think any of my rankings are just blown out of proportion, like I'm overreacting, or I should have somebody moved way up or way lower than they actually are? Feel free to comment that down below, and I look forward to seeing you guys next week as well. Okay, peace out.